To be completely honest, I think hip hop criticism is in a weird state right now. In all my time on the internet hearing the various arguments on why current gen musical figures aren't as good or why this generation is trash, always boggles my mind because I feel it always comes with unnecessary anchoring or rose-tinted vision. Whether it be artists being all about algorithms and streaming numbers, rappers not saying anything in their songs anymore, sampling ruining hip hop, female rappers being too provocative, you get the point. Most of the time when I see his critiques listed, there's almost always a lazy pointing to the current generation as the problem, and failing to acknowledge most of these systems rather being symptoms of the increased control in the music industry or the shifting of the culture as a whole. And I did not have enough time to unpack that in the video. So I want to do something different. In all of these unpopular opinions or hot takes about these new artists right now, I don't see this question being brought up that much. Who out here is still studying? There comes a quote from an artist named Ethan Becker that stuck with me in the past few years. The point within that context was to constantly reference professional artists in order to develop an appealing style of your own, aka the basis of master studies. This introduction to this concept opened my eyes into just how much more is put into working on one's craft, the amount of reps and time taken to break into that master level. And while this type of studying isn't as displayed, at least in the world of hip hop, you can tell who's went out of their way to learn and improve from those who've come before. So I wanted to take a few artists in today's climate to examine and analyze what separates the good and great, as well as some of the measures taken for them to get there. And these concepts can also be applied to any medium you're thinking about. So with that being said, let's get into it. So initially I was going to start off with Kanye, but with everything that's happened in hip hop this year, I feel that Kendrick would have been a better starter. In this beef alone, Kendrick demonstrated some of the purest and most authentic displays of artistry throughout the whole beef. Off the rip in his career, he listed rappers like Nas, Ice Cube, Tupac, and etc. And each of these influences can clearly be heard throughout the diss tracks that followed the spring. However, I didn't anticipate GNX coming out. GNX is Kendrick's biggest foray into the West Coast sound, from mostly featuring West Coast rappers to some of the lyrics literally being "screw subliminals, I want y'all to bop to this." The project feels very cohesive in its subject matters and yet isolated at the same time. It's honestly more akin to a mixtape in my opinion, but two tracks on this album immediately stood out to me: Reincarnated and Heart Part 6. Starting with the former, the Tupac sample sort of speaks for itself. For me at least, it's not the lyrical content, it's not even necessarily the song structure, but the cadence and energy that Kendrick exudes throughout this instrumental. As someone who, to be honest, has never really listened to Tupac up until very recently, from the stuff I've heard, from the interviews I've seen, from my observations of what the culture thinks about him as a figure, K-Dot's delivery and emotions feel very in line with how profound and nuanced Tupac's art is to this day. This track also comes in direct contrast to the Stunt Drake pull with Taylor Made Freestyle, which not only started with a Tupac AI verse, which is disrespectful on so many levels, but it was lazy too. I actually refused to listen to this diss until making this video, and it's painfully obvious that the AI is just using Drake's flow, a genuinely soulless move to put words in his mouth, which promptly became the driving force for Euphoria, and you know the rest. With Heart Part 6, it's a significantly more reminiscent track, talking about the early days of TDE, Black Hippie, and Kendrick's come up. In the first verse, Kendrick cites Ab-Soul as his inspiration that he studied to define his pen. If you don't know who Ab-Soul is, just listen to Soulburger and then it'll all make sense. In the same song, however, Kendrick also mentioned Schoolboy Q, from not even rapping to using TDE's roster as an inspiration to learn. And even in an Ab-Soul interview, he says that learning from the studio low-key inspired the name Schoolboy Q. There are multiple interviews to reference where Q and Kendrick's brotherhood allow Q to succeed, and it brings up the importance of camaraderie and friendly competition. For my first calculus class freshman year, I made some really good friends from joining their study sessions. Shout out to y'all. I know y'all are watching. All of us were in different levels of understanding the material, but whether it be cramming for an exam the week of or just spamming practice problems after class, every one of us made sure we'd be straight to pass. I'm making this sound like a award. My point is, having a group of people whose goals and ambitions genuinely align with yours makes every part of your development as an artist easier. Keeping motivation or just friendly competition amongst each other helps to push your abilities farther than just duking it out alone. So I've talked about Tyler a few times before on my channel, specifically in regards to his metamorphosis of his public perception and attention to detail. While I talked about the various changes he made to his work with the album Flower Boy, I never really mentioned any of the measures he took to get there. In Flower Boy Conversation, Tyler spends the first few minutes talking about some of the preparation for this project, citing the studying of different pop aspects in the club and etc. However, his installment in the Rap Caviar Hulu series brings more context to this. Tyler cites the listing of all of his songs up to that point, only enjoying 3 songs and deciding to go back to the drawing board. Reading books on structure, what people consider good writing, how melodies work. Tyler in this area essentially took the time to catch up or brush up on the very basics. And mixing it with his true love for music is how we've seen everything from 2017 onward. Earlier this year in the summer, I felt pretty dissatisfied with the editing of my videos, so as an excuse to learn motion graphics, I take videos from my recommended, go to the Fusion tab, and pretty much recreate the visuals to the best of my ability. Not only did I get to tap in more of my editing software, but I gained a better understanding of what other creators prioritize and how to discern which visuals serve a project more going forward. It's never a waste of time to revisit the basics. Another topic I think Tyler's career brings up is the value of a mentor. Now, it's no secret that Pharrell has influenced not just the game but the culture as a whole, but his relationship in Tyler in particular is interesting. In the Sydney installment of his All-Star series with Converse, Tyler recalls a studio session with Pharrell on various reactions to the roughs of Glitter, Pothole, and Who That Boy, in which the latter unlocked the reaction in everyone but T, and Pharrell proceeded to spend an hour giving him game that he didn't fully understand at the time. And honestly, that's one of the biggest perks of having a mentor in general. Though I did mention how having a group with similar ambitions can be a major factor within your development, having a singular figure with that much more experience and wisdom can give you advice and blueprints that you may not be able to fully understand. Especially nowadays with how many free resources you can use to learn different mediums, having that relation can also maintain your discipline. And I think the next artist perfectly encapsulates that principle, but first, let me take a water break. I'll be right back. So my introduction to Doechii wasn't from any of her music, but from a TikTok showing one of her old YouTube videos. She was also musically very skilled, but I sort of put her at the back of my head to look for in future reference. And then she held a live alligator on camera. Doechii's spotlight in a way feels comically cliched to some, with the sudden pushing, multiple Grammy nominations, cosigns from some of the best to do it in the culture, and with an unwavering sense of hunger in the game, all before a major studio album. In a world where albums are only promoted for a short time and fizzle out, the presence of a proper promoting of an artist feels unprecedented to some, for some reason. Alligator Bites Never Heal is an alley-oop of a project with as much effort and vibes, and her biggest asset by far is her attention to detail. In her Rolling Stone interview, she explains the ending to one of her standout tracks, The Now Is a River. So at the end, she enacts this breathing exercise, almost akin to hyperventilating if you listen to it for the first time, and she explains this as a beatboxing style inspired by Dougie Fresh. When was the last time you heard any mainstream rapper solidly reference beatboxing? There's more intricacies in the lyrics throughout the mixtape, but what I found more interesting when doing research was the story and preparation for this project. A good amount of the results for this tape was keeping consciousness and removing personal distractions. In a few of her latest interviews actually, she talks about how she got to a point where she couldn't get into a studio without smoking or drinking, and that for her to get to where she is now, she cut those off and went hermit mode as she describes. Now, I'm not and will not claim to be a psychologist, therapist, medical professional, or anything of that sort. I'm not going for that. So I won't claim any specific vices to 100% avoid. You know yourself better than me to make that conclusion. However, I will say that one of mine and a bunch of others probably this. Algorithms are a double-edged sword, and there's a million videos about how it homogenizes the culture and stuff like that, so I won't even touch that topic too much. However, as I've gotten older with this internet thing, I've recognized my personal responsibility in this relationship. Even with some platforms having more sensitive personal feeds than others, I'm still giving them an idea of what I interact with. That's why whenever I hear friends complain about Twitter or TikTok or insert toxic app here, I always direct them to the not interested button. Because how do you let an app take up your screen time and you still hate it? That's just foolish. at least filter out your feed to make your experience more enjoyable, or delete the app too. All of this is rotting our brains. The awareness to completely reset her mindset for her being and for her art is probably the biggest contributor to the final product. Now, while this sounds drastic to some, we live in a world where even leaving Instagram for like a week stresses people out. The constant need to keep occupied with anything, even if we forget what we just spent the last hour on, is a genuine issue for many. And especially if you feel dissatisfied with your work for an extended amount of time, I think we need to raise our standards a little bit on what we occupy our time with. Another concept beautifully demonstrated with this album is the idea of letting loose with your ideas. Despite the subject matter and emotions from the project stretching years, in multiple interviews she said the actual project was put together in a month. She literally called the label and said, "I'm dropping a mixtape at the end of the month. Do with that what you will." With the mixtape and hip-hop being free from the bounds and expectations of full albums, along with the introduction of her Swamp sessions, I'd imagine this period of time also served as a release of baggage of sorts. As artists sometimes, we tend to dwell on certain ideas for maybe longer than they'll serve you, and I relate to this 100%. However, I had to realize whenever I put a piece of work out, it's out of my control on how the world perceives it at that point. What is in my control is how much I'm willing to let out, how much I'm willing to release this idea from my mind, because sticking to certain ideas for too long causes stagnation, especially if you aren't even ready to execute that idea yet. So I wanted to make something a little different than regurgitating all the points on YouTube on why hip hop is dead and all that. I also wanted to try a different style, so let me know how y'all feel about this. If you liked the video, you don't have to subscribe right away, but I'd really appreciate it if you left a comment. Comments give me feedback on what I can do to improve my videos, and it also just promotes genuine discussion about the topics at hand, which is really the point of these videos. Again, all my social medias are in the links below in the description, and the Discord's in there as well. This year's been a lot for me personally, but not so much for this channel, and that's not happening again. All I will say is that I'll be changing things up in the future, so anyone who's still willing to stick around, I'm actually excited for what I have to show you in 2025. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Okay, bye.